Hello there. With today's wine, I'm starting a look at some wines made from Garnatxa, which I think is a variety that can provide some really great value for money. So we're in Spain and we're looking at Grenache. So this particular wine is Via Terra Selection 2020, and this is a wine from Terra Alta, which is the DO, and the producer is Bodegas Edetaria. Now, when I say Garnatxa can offer some great value for money, I think the point is that these wines can be characterful, they can have concentration, they often have reasonably generous alcohol, and they tend not to be heavily structured, which means they're often very approachable, they don't require long aging. And so there's a sort of a generosity that sort of represents value for money, I suppose. So Terra Alta is a DO, relatively newly created, 1985, in Catalonia, about 60 kilometers to the west of Tarragona. So you're inland, you're up in the, I'll say hills, but these are clearly mountains, because some of them will reach up to about 950 meters above sea level. And what this means is that the climate, although it's Mediterranean influenced, also has a continental aspect to it, because the area is sheltered by hills from the direct influence of the Mediterranean. So it's warm, it's sunny, it's quite dry, but they have quite cold winters here. Now, the wine actually stipulates that it's a Garnachxa Negra, and that's worth doing in Terra Alta, because Terra Alta, it's quite a large area of vineyards. It's one of the larger vineyard regions in Catalonia, and actually they've got a third of the world's Garnachxa Blanca, Grenache Blanc, growing in this region. Bodegas Edetaria was founded Joan Àngel Lliberia in 2003, when he built a winery on his family-owned vineyards in the region. So Joan had grown up in the vineyards. His grandfather had been a winemaker who'd sold his wine in bulk. His parent had tended vines and sold the grapes to the local cooperative. And Joan trained as an agronomist, initially in Spain, then did a master's in oenology in France, and worked both in France and Spain in wineries there. He was away from home for about 10 years before returning here. And he was actually very ambitious to create his own winery. So having built the winery, he then built it up to be one of the leading and one of the most respected producers in Terra Alta. But his ambition wasn't just for his winery, his ambition has been for the region. He'd seen the success that other regions nearby had places like Priorat or Montsant, both in terms of the quality of their wines and in terms of their commercial success. And he was determined to emulate this. Now, the name Edetaria relates to the Via Edetària, which is a Roman road running through this region that ran from Torresota to Zaragoza. And I think the connection is that they believe that this was one of the first areas in Catalonia to produce wine, and that winemaking tradition actually predates the arrival of the Romans in this region. So the winery is located in the town of Gandesa. They have 60 hectares of vines, and they only make wine with fruit that they have grown themselves. They don't buy in any fruit from anywhere. They only use indigenous varieties, and they're certified both as organic and for their sustainable practices. They have some wonderful resources of old vines. Their oldest vines are 60 years old, and the rest of their vineyards are between 25 and 40 years old. These are all located on the plain near Gandesa, where they lie on elevated terraces, and these are well-drained situations, so that helps to keep yields low. They identify 5 distinct terroirs within their vineyards. First of all, Panal, which has a subsoil of a fossilized sand dune from the Quaternary period. You then have Tapas, which is a silty clay, the Tapas Blanc, which is a shallow marl with carbonated fragments. You have a soil type that they call codols, which are presumably rounded river stones, old riverbeds. Then you have fertile, deep lime soils that are known as val. And the point is that each of these differing terroirs gives a different character to the wines that grow on it. And so they try and keep the plots separate during vinification. The winery is set up so they have smaller fermenters so that they don't have to combine plots with different soil type. In the vineyards, their practices, as I say, are both organic and sustainable. So you'll see, for instance, cover crops being rotated. So one year they'll plant a cover crop that requires tilling back in, and next year they will plant a cover crop that doesn't require tilling. They'll use green fertilizers and manures, so cuttings, cover crops and manure are all returned into the soil to provide nutrients. Obviously there's no use of pesticides, fertilizers. They have a system of sensors in the soil to regulate irrigation so that the vines aren't overwatered. And their sustainable approach doesn't just end in the vineyard, they also have solar power for the winery. In terms of their grapevines, they're involved in a project, a biosphere project, to propagate the local variety within the region to ensure that the phenotype of these varieties is a traditional one from Catalonia, rather than having to buy these from nurseries outside the region. Harvesting's a very important time for them as far as quality is concerned. Everything is hand-picked, but it's not just hand-picked, it's hand-picked, it's sorted, and it's placed in shallow baskets where it's cooled down and cooled to somewhere between 0 and -5 degrees C. Once it's been cooled, the fruit is then sorted again, just to make sure that no unripe fruit goes into the fermenters. So one portion of the fruit will be cold macerated, so there's a quite gentle extraction of aromas and colours, whereas the remaining portion will be fermented more traditionally at a higher temperature to ensure that there's more tannin extracted and to give more richness. Aging for this particular wine goes on for somewhere between 4 and 6 months in oak barrels, but these are 300-litre barrels rather than smaller barriques. And I would assume that they're older, particularly because this is a wine at a fairly entry-level price point, so they're not going to be applying expensive oak to its maturity. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? We have a relatively deep, dark, black ruby sort of colour there. It's by no means opaque. I can see the stem of the glass through it quite clearly, so I suppose it's medium to medium deep. Swirling it, the wine's label says it has 14% alcohol. It is clinging to the glass and eventually is slowly forming some quite noticeable tears running down there. Let's see what make of the aromas, shall we? On the nose, there's a richness and a spiciness. There's almost a hint of meatiness, but you've got sort of quite high ripeness fruit, sort of ripe red plum through to almost a sort of slight pruniness, not overripe, but high ripeness. And then at the back of that, there's a sort of a peppery note of spice there. So it's not a cedary oak spice or cinnamon or something like that. It's much more sort of peppery in its nature. As I say, hints perhaps of meatiness, but really quite rich, ripe fruit to the fore. So let's have a taste. On the palate, that's quite rich and full, yet at the same time, the structure is soft and smooth. There is plenty of that sort of peppery note. They're not tight tannins, they're quite open, and there's quite a grip. You get the impression there's a certain amount of tannin coming from the pips here. It's not sort of smooth, polished, oaky tannins. It's a slightly more rustic palate structure. But behind that, there's lovely smooth fruit. There really is a richness and a ripeness to sort of red plum sort of fruit coming through to darker plum, touches of sort of more soft red fruit, sort of mulberry, raspberry, that sort of note. And again, this delicate pepperiness across the back of the palate. Vividly peppery, it's a gentle pepperiness that's integrated well into the fruit. Now, the acidity doesn't seem particularly sharp, and yet at the same time, there's quite a lively juiciness to the back palate that's giving some quite nice length. And I can feel I'm salivating slightly. So there's quite a good acidity here, and it's giving reasonable length. Now, the alcohol at 14% is adding a bit of warmth, and I think certainly it's adding some weight to the palate. But at the same time, there's not a hot finish to the wine because there's some quite good concentration of fruit. I did look at the Wine Searcher aggregated score that we have for this, and it's scoring a 90, which I think is very impressive actually for a wine at this sort of value for money price point. And I think that's a sort of score that's very well earned. It's a wine that is well made, but it's more than just well made. It has some character. It has some complexity. There's enough structure there that I think this could age for 2 or 3 years. I wouldn't put it in the cellar for a long period of time, but it's certainly not a wine that you need to think about drinking up in the first year that you have it. So yes, there's character, there's quality, and I really do like that in this wine, and I think that's the sort of thing that you see a lot with Grenache. It's an estate-made wine at a really good price. So yes, thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. We'd appreciate that a lot. If you're enjoying watching these tastings, please do subscribe to our channel. It would be great to have your support there. If you have any comments you'd like to add, please pop those in the comments box below. We really are interested to hear what you think about the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. If you have friends you think might like to watch the video, please do share it with them. We'd appreciate that a lot. I'll leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher page for this vintage of this wine, so that you can find out more about its pricing, its availability, and any of the other details that you can find on the tabs on that page. So thank you again for joining us, and do please try and take some time and come and join us for another tasting in the near future, won't you? Thanks again. Bye for now.